At the edge of an international border, at the edge of the Pacific, at the edge of innovation, community, education, and discovery, you're listening to At the Edge of It All, a University of San Diego podcast where USD experts speak on topics and stories that impact you and the broader community. With the turn of the switch, the lights turn on. It's something we're going to talk about today on the At the Edge of It All podcast called the Energy Academy. It's a program that was started here at USD to help local leaders learn a little bit more about how our energy works. Let's take a listen. So we've had you both on the podcast, but separately. And so this time we want to talk about a collaboration you guys have had called the Energy Academy. It's a program we started here at USD. But aside from the Energy Academy, we want to take a bigger look at energy in general, how energy is produced here locally in California, and why it matters to the average Joe at home to learn about this, and especially our elected officials, right, to understand how the energy systems work to make more educated legislation and all that good stuff in our communities. So tell me a little bit to start. What is the Energy Academy and why did you guys start it?
So the San Diego Regional Energy Academy, we've been a project that we've been working on together for a little over 2 years, coming up on 3 years of working from, idea to design and now into having over 60 cohort graduates of our Energy Academy, which is really exciting. But this is a program that we co-designed between the Energy Policy Initiative Center and the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative to be housed here at USD. And it's really to raise the energy IQ of the diverse leaders across the San Diego region who are finding themselves having to interact more and more each day with energy and energy policy. Energy intersects at a lot of different components of our life. And so we felt that this was a really great high need opportunity for our region's leaders to more deeply understand the interconnectedness and the connectivity of our energy grid itself, as well as the energy systems and, larger, mapping, I guess, of the players in the region who are impacting energy. And so that they can kind of help their communities make better decisions around energy, electricity, and all of the things that go into that program.
And what are they learning? Are we talking basic energy? Are we getting really deep in the weeds? Like, what are they getting to learn when they walk away from this course?
Yeah, I would say I would think of it as Energy 101. So where does your energy come from? Who delivers your energy? As Darbi mentioned, who are the players? What are the targets that our state is driving towards? What are some of the challenges? Things like that. I think, what are some of the climate impacts that are facing the system and how does that affect our ability to reach targets? So I think we do get into a little bit of detail, but I would say by and large, it's sort of Energy 101 because the problem with this topic is you can scratch the surface, but then if you go down, you have to go all the way. It gets very complicated very quickly. So we're trying not to get too mired down in that, but we want to expose the participants to enough concepts, topics, challenges, ideas, so that when they're at a meeting and they hear something come up, they hear an acronym, they'll know what the acronym means.
And this is mostly for elected officials, nonprofits, people that kind of deal with energy in some capacity or might deal with it in some capacity, right? Or could somebody like an average Joe attend the course?
Yeah, right now our program is geared towards folks who are making decisions or influencing decisions on behalf of San Diego's, communities and finding themselves. Some of them are folks who maybe work in energy adjacent landscapes. So thinking our elected officials or their chief of staff and the folks who are helping them decide on policy, they really need to understand what is this large landscape, especially making, these large financial decisions for our San Diego communities. And also, folks coming from different nonprofit sectors who maybe never knew that they were going to be interacting with energy. But, if you're working on housing development, your job is also energy policy and understanding that for, the folks that you're trying to build new affordable housing for in our region. So right now we're really gearing it towards, nonprofit leaders, our elected officials, public agency professionals and public agency staff, as well as some, different diverse consultants and for-profit individuals. But we hope that this program will continue to grow and expand and we'll be able to offer it to a broader network.
And do you find that just with your recent cohorts, once they have knowledge of how the energy works, once you're educated in something, right, you can make better, more informed decisions rather than reading about it yourself or trying to figure it out on your own. And at the end of the day, your goal is that they have like a higher energy IQ, as you said, And is that to make more energy efficient goals, or what do you guys hope the goals can be once they have that knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a lot of things that folks can do with the information from the Energy Academy. But as Scott mentioned, the goal of the Academy is really to build a foundation to have more individuals feel confident to engage in the dialogue. Understanding our energy landscape can be really intimidating. As someone who works in climate, but isn't necessarily focused on energy all the time, it's really intimidating to keep up with all the nomenclature and information. And so if you're really not working in anything adjacent to energy, it can be even more of a burden, to feel like you can enter that conversation and enter in a way where you can make informed decisions, for whomever the community is you're serving. So I think giving folks that strong foundation. And one of the other things we're really excited about this program is that it's, geared towards also building community and building connections among the cohort graduates. So these folks spend 3 days together, like long days with us. We do a lot of cool field trips. We get to go visit some great sites. We got to feed some goats on one of our trips, which was really awesome. But a lot of it is just creating those connections so that folks have now a foundation of conversation, but they also now have connections with each other. And so we're also working on some programs to keep an alumni network of graduates going, find some topics that maybe, do deserve some time to go deep on, as Scott said, and try to create those one-off opportunities for, folks who've been through our cohorts to stay connected and kind of that groundswell of momentum and conversation to keep them, moving in this space.
Yeah. Well, let's do a little energy 101 here. And Scott, you're probably the best help for this one. What does our energy system look like here locally in San Diego and in California? Where are we getting our energy sources? I feel like just as people outside of this space, we hear a lot of like the terms of solar, decarbonization, all of these words. And maybe we kind of know what they are, but not so much. So without going too deep in the weeds, what can we know a little bit about our energy system here in San Diego and California?
Yeah, so California is pretty aggressive in its targets to reduce greenhouse gases and also to supply clean electricity to homes and businesses in the state. So right now in San Diego, about 50% of our electricity is supplied by renewable resources. About 45 is from natural gas, and the rest is from what we call zero carbon, which is nuclear and hydroelectric. So it's definitionally different from renewable energy, but it's zero carbon. That's the goal. So that's basically the mix for San Diego, and that's approximately the mix for the state. I think the state might be a little bit further ahead as a whole, further ahead than us as a region. But generally speaking, that's what the supply looks like. Now, in terms of who supplies, SDG&E is the owner of the infrastructure in the region. So they own all of the transmission and distribution lines. You can think of transmission as a freeway for electricity, and you can think of the distribution system as like your local neighborhood roads, smaller, going many more places, delivering power to your home and to your neighbors' homes. Who do you buy your electricity from? So it used to be very simple, but now it's a little bit more complicated. So we have SDG&E supplies. We have something called direct access, which is an old policy from about 25 years ago that allows customers to purchase their electricity from a supplier other than SDG&E or now the community choice aggregators. And that there's about 20% of people who do that, 15 to 20% of people, mostly large businesses. And now kind of the big change that's happened in the past, I'd say 10 years, is community choice aggregation programs. So this is also a policy from about 20 years ago, but it took a while for them to for that to come to fruition. And so now in our region, we have 2 community choice aggregation providers, San Diego Community Power and Clean Energy Alliance. And they are made up of local jurisdictions. So local jurisdictions come together, form a joint powers authority, and purchase electricity on behalf of their residents and businesses. So it's not easy. In fact, we had a delegation of Japanese a couple years ago, and they were trying to understand California and our region, and we took them to see one of these community choice aggregators. And technically, they're nonprofits. And they just couldn't understand, why is a nonprofit selling electricity? Just could not understand our system. So I think in general, our electric system is the system in general, not just the physical infrastructure, is pretty complicated. But anyway, in a nutshell, that's kind of who delivers the power, who you get your bill from, which is important, and where that supply comes from.
Yeah, and I feel like it's like a course for everybody should maybe take a course on just how it all works, right? Because we turn on the light and the light is there, right? We don't really think about too much other than the bill we pay. But one thing interesting from the class when I attend a little bit of the academy was how reliable it is here in San Diego of our power. We, like I said, you turn it on and it's usually there. I would say most of the time. It's rare to have a power outage. Is that unique to California or San Diego? Or?
I mean, I think we do have very high reliability here in San Diego. And that's in part because we have a good system, but also in part because we don't have much weather. So my mom lives on the East Coast and hurricane comes through and she might not have power for days or a week. Whereas here, I mean, generally speaking, our power is very reliable. Maybe a shutoff, an intentional shutoff because of wildfire risk. That's happening more and more. Usually in the backcountry, East County. But yeah, we have a very reliable system. I think in the Energy Academy, I say something along the lines of, we should all be calling the utility and our providers and telling them how amazed it is, how amazed we are, and how amazing it is that we have such reliable power. The power came on again today. I got up and I had hot water. It was amazing. But I think what we find is the exact opposite, is that people don't say anything about it or don't even think about it until the light doesn't come on. Then people go ballistic, which tells you how important electricity is for all of us in our day-to-day lives.
What have you seen in your work as far as changes happening in our energy system? And I don't know, Darby, if this relates to you too, with just what you're seeing environmentally. What have been some changes in the last few years that we've been seeing in our energy? I know we're seeing obviously more solar on rooftops, but what do those changes look like? And I imagine it is, again, going back to the fact that it's a lot for people to keep up with, just see you and I, but also people that are in this space having to make decisions. So what are some big ones that you've seen?
I would say there are a couple of big changes that have happened in the past, say, 10, 20 years. Maybe overall kind of general trend is moving away from fossil fuels into more cleaner energy sources. We've seen a huge growth in renewable resources for electricity over the last 10 or 20 years. You know, when I first came to San Diego, we maybe had a couple percent of renewable supply in the portfolio here in San Diego. And now we have about 50%. So that's a huge change. I would say that's a huge change. I would also say another big change is what I mentioned earlier about who you get your bill from. It used to just be SDG&E, and now it's community choice aggregators. That's a pretty significant change. I would also say a final change, and maybe Darby has more to say about this, is we've started to see the impacts of climate change affecting the energy system. And so at the same time, we're trying to decarbonize, become cleaner as an energy system, we're also facing climate impacts. So I don't know, Darby, if you have.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that. But I also, before I forget it, I want to add, I think one of the other components that I've seen change a lot in the discourse is also, individuals being more connected to the energy system beyond just turning their lights on and paying the bill. Being able to, if you own your home, install solar, or being able to install a battery storage on your house and kind of have that independence and action in the energy market, I think is something newer that's been happening in the last 10 to 15 years, where it is more conversational to go to someone's home and have dinner and someone talk about, oh, we got solar turned on, and how that's saving them money on their bill, or whatever their decisions around that was, or maybe they're driving an EV. And I think one of the components that we talk about with the Energy Academy is, well, one, the difference between energy and then, explicitly electricity, and making sure that folks are using those kind of, nomenclatures, appropriately and adequately. But especially when we talk about climate change too. Some of these decisions are being driven by our local elected leaders responding to, one, the climate crisis, and two, also our communities kind of demanding action on the climate crisis. San Diego has had long support from our communities, for almost 20 years on climate action. Some work that I know Scott and others at USD led years ago on public polling said 9 out of 10 San Diegans believe in climate change, and they believe it's happening now. And I think that was 2015 when that data came out. So we're almost at the 10-year anniversary of that. And so I think you see a lot of the changes in these opportunities in our energy and electricity, in our distribution systems, as a result of folks being more concerned about climate change, but also understanding their agency to be a part of the solutions and what that looks like at a distributed scale. So that distributed energy network is now something that we talk about a lot more frequently of, where our battery storage, and then thinking about resilience, right? I know Scott mentioned what we call public safety power shutoffs when we're, turning off power or transmission lines at time of high fire risk, which we saw, fire risk extending into the new year this year with the massive wildfires in LA. But kind of having more people understand their own risks and where they are located, I think has entered this conversation and given us more opportunity to be decision makers in the energy system itself.
Yeah, to kind of expand on that, Darby, just when we think about it, Scott works in energy and energy policies, and on your side of things, kind of branching off from what you just said, working with climate and environment, what are your hopes for energy and how energy policy can be changed for the better? Like you said, it is a big concern for San Diegans. So what are some of your hopes with this and sort of a positive from all of it?
You see a lot of the changes that, our local governments are looking to make as it relates to energy, all outlined in our climate action plan. So, 18 of our 19 jurisdictions in San Diego County have a active climate action plan that has goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of those goals are achievable by, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions in our energy and electricity sector. But also, a lot of them, in the transition, we're putting more things online that are electrified, right? If we're asking folks to transition their natural gas water heaters to, hybrid electric heat pumps, it's still asking for a different demand on our grid of, what energy sources we're pulling from. And so that begs the question of how are we also building resilience into this, into this grid and into this conversation so that we don't have, days where it gets really hot. And I don't know if anyone was here in California about 2 years ago when we had a really hot summer day and they used the state emergency service. That was the first time they ever sent out an emergency notification. And you can see the grid and the graph from that day is pretty awesome to see how many people responded to reducing their energy load. But as we see climate impacts, we see, projections for our region, we're going to have longer hot periods. We're going to have hotter days. More people are going to be installing air conditioning. They're going to be pulling from the grid more readily. And so that conversation really needs to shift around energy resilience for our communities so that it's okay if everyone has an AC, but if everyone turns it on and the grid can't support it, then, do we have a resilient community? And, how are we talking about that? I think it goes hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking ahead, one thing I noticed too by just attending the Energy Academy just for a little bit was these new jobs that are popping up. Some people are now sustainability is a part of their title, or a new hire has a sustainability title now. Are you guys seeing that a lot? And I imagine this is a positive, right? Where companies are now assigning someone to focus on sustainability and making their company and their business thriving in that area, right? Or at least thinking about it.
Yeah, it's been a trend over the past, I would say 10 plus years.
Okay.
But yeah, we're seeing, we work a lot with local governments, and there are climate action plan administrators or sustainability directors or whatever. So resilience, we see now resilience officers in local governments and businesses. So yeah, I think it's a trend, and it's a transition. So people who work in the fossil fuel industry, we have to figure out a way to transition those jobs. But on the other side, installing solar, wind, heat pumps, as Darby alluded to, there should be job creation if we do things to the extent that we hope we will and should. There should be jobs created.
Yeah. And I think too, with the opportunity around, more individuals or more businesses being able to kind of take ownership and action in the energy market by, installing solar or, choosing to install battery storage areas, or, we see businesses, opting to install electric vehicle chargers in their parking lots. I think there's a lot more job opportunities in that space too for, different diverse individuals beyond just the public sector, to get involved in the energy, market and network and create jobs around some of these sustainable solutions. And, I think that distributed resources also creates a distributed network of job opportunities.
Yeah, very cool. We'll put a link for the Energy Academy in the notes here, but you guys are going to be trying to continue this, right? So tell us a little bit about, if people are interested listening, how can they find you? How can they sign up for the next one?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're hoping to launch a few new cohorts and hoping to have at least one in this calendar year. We'll send a link in the show notes that we have a sign-up list that you can put your name on to receive first notice of when Energy Academy applications open. So that would be the best way to stay in touch with us, is to sign up for that listserv, and whenever the next cohort is open, that's who hears from us first.
And it's free, right, to attend?
Yeah. One of the big principles for us around the Energy Academy is creating a free resource. So trying to make sure that folks have these tools. And, I think that's a really great role for the university to serve in, kind of as that anchor institution.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for being here. I learned a lot, and I think everyone listening probably did as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to catch our next one.